So thank you very much, first of all, for joining us again and not leaving us completely alone, lonely, in the dark. So your company is really appreciated. And so I would like to start with, first of all, correcting our minds with refuge and bodhicitta. So we can, normally what I do in my personal meditation and practices, I start every session with, first of all, relaxing my body, then relaxing my mind. But I would like to spend today most of the time in looking at the material that we need to cover. So let's first of all make sure that our posture is comfortable, taking two or three deep breaths. Then we're going to turn our attention to the breath and count a round of 21 breaths in order to settle our mind, to create more focus. And also making sure that the mind is not too tight, but also not too relaxed. And then we'll start thinking of going for refuge so that our discussion today in itself will become a Buddhist practice. But also if we make sure that we generate bodhicitta based on an attitude that is seeking to be of utmost benefit to everyone that we encounter, session would also in itself become a session of the Mahayana Dharma. And so taking 2 or 3 deep breaths and then turning our attention to the breath and counting the round of 21 breaths, using every breath as an anchor for a mind that is more focused and relaxed. And so to begin our session, we first are going to remind ourselves that all of us have obtained a precious human birth, a body that is endowed with everything that is conducive for spiritual development, for mental development. And so we have external conditions that make it possible. We have teachers and teachings that engage our mind, but also internally we have everything possible to making use of the great wealth of the Dharma. We were born as intelligent human beings without any physical disability that will make it impossible for us to develop our mind. We don't have any strong wrong views that completely close our heart and mind to the teachings. Though we are not born, most of us, in Buddhist places, still the teachings are available to us, and there are monastic communities that operate and make the teachings available to us. We have faith and trust in the teachings of the Buddha. Keeping in mind that the Buddha came to this world, taught the Dharma. The Dharma is still with us. There are communities of students and practitioners that keep the Dharma going. And people that support us directly and indirectly in our spiritual endeavor. So we want to make the most out of it in this life. not being completely engrossed in the affairs of this life, but thinking of future lifetimes and beyond. Deciding that if we have attained a precious human rebirth with an incredible circumstance of freedoms and richnesses, we can use it to create imprints, develop habits that will lead us in a succession of lives to enlightenment or liberation. And it's so difficult to find freedoms and richnesses, for the very basis for them is guarding pure ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtues. And this is what we are studying together, the 10 non-virtues. And so we hope to understand better our precious human rebirth when we understand the difficulties in safeguarding a precious ethical discipline. And we also keep in mind that the time that we have to practice, study and practice in this life is limited. Every day that passes, we approach the time of death, taking one step after the next. And while the time of death is uncertain, what is certain that when death comes around, the only thing that will be able to take with us from this lifetime to the next are the habits that we have formed in this life and previous lives, the imprints that we've placed upon our continuum, whereas our body, our possessions, all those who are dear to our heart, all of them will be left behind. And so we want to affect this life to our best ability in order to avoid a miserable rebirth in our next lifetime, to again be born as human beings, free and fortunate human beings. But not only that, to continue to practice the Dhamma, to continue to encounter spiritual teachers, to work towards liberation and enlightenment. And so for that end, we take the first step in going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So the Buddha, the teacher, the Dhamma that the Buddha developed in his mind, an insight into reality and the cessation of everything that obscured the Buddha's mind. And also we take safe direction in the teachings of the Buddha and the community of Aryas that have realized the teachings of the Buddha, and particularly they've realized reality, and thereby through their own personal experience they can teach us. So thinking of beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, or any other teacher that you rely upon, that for you is an embodiment of the Buddha. For you, they are Arya Sangha. And we take refuge in them so that we ourselves can become Buddhas, embody the Dhamma in our mind stream, so that we ourselves can become an Arya Sangha, teaching the Dhamma to others, motivated by love and compassion, wishing to benefit everyone that is exactly like us, seeking happiness and well-being, wanting to avoid suffering and pain. And so we're going to engage with the discussion about karma, in thinking that I want to learn to my best ability the way to behave in an ethical way, to create a foundation for a precious human rebirth, a foundation that I will use for my own Buddhahood. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right, let's start. And so in our previous session, we had a look at the four general characteristics of karma. So karma increases. Actually, the first one was karma is certain. Positive actions certainly lead to positive results, happiness. Negative actions certainly lead to negative results, unless we purify negative actions done before. So we looked at the first characteristics of karma. The second one was karma increases. Every moment that passes, karma increases and magnifies. The third characteristics was we do not meet the results of actions we did not do. And the fourth characteristics is karma does not go to waste. These are the general characteristics of karma. Then we started to look more specifically at the 10 parts of actions. And so the introduction to the 10 parts of actions in Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation states that there are many ways in which we perform actions, many different actions that we perform, countless actions you can say, but still the majority of them can be brought under the umbrella of the 10 non-virtues. So we look at the 10 parts of virtuous actions, the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions, and then understanding them, we make a deliberate decision to abstain from them, and thereby practice the 10 virtues, which are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. And so just to illustrate that, we have non-virtues of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. The opposite of them is not simply not killing, in that when I'm sleeping or dreaming, hopefully I'm not killing. No, I'm not stealing when I'm sleeping. So just the absence of an action doesn't mean to say that I practice a path of virtuous action. It is through understanding the drawbacks of negative actions, of non-virtuous actions, making a conscious decision to abstain from them. And also on top of that, we can say that, for example, opposite to killing, we have saving life, protecting the life of others. So we abstain from killing and we protect the lives of others. Anyway, we'll look at the parts of the 10 virtuous actions later on. We'll start to look at the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions. One point that I made was, just switching on the fan, one point that I made is related to the presentation of the 10 parts of actions. So they're called parts of actions rather than the 10 actions. So often we speak of the action of killing or stealing or sexual misconduct, but the Lamaran tradition teaches us, rather than the action, the whole path of taking an action, which consists of different components. First of all, what the object that we use for the action? Like, for example, in case of killing, it is another living being. What the preliminary part for performing an action, which is, for example, what is the type of perception that we have? Is it a precise perception or is it a mistaken perception? If our perception is mistaken, the weight of the action is likely to be smaller. Whereas if the perception is right perception, it is likely that the action will become heavier. So we have the perception. Then we have the type of affliction that is involved in the performance of an action. Like, for example, killing obviously can be done motivated by hatred, anger, resentment, wrath, whatever you call that negative emotion. That's an affliction. But also killing can be motivated by attachment, and also killing can be motivated by ignorance. But we also said that to really bring the action, to bring forward the force of killing, it needs to be done with a certain degree of anger, the intention to harm others. Then obviously there is also the intentionality that is involved with that, the intention to sever or to end somebody else's life. So that's the preliminary part for the performance of an action. Then we have the actual performance. Then we have the culmination of an action. And so the presentation breaks down a path of action into these components, because there's some, for us as staying in samsara, living in samsara, we are samsaric beings, we have no ability to completely shun negative actions. Impossible. sometimes we intend well. I remember that a few years ago, I attended some teachings with Tai Situ Rinpoche. He's my ordination master. And at some point, he made that comment that sometimes he's speaking with people that are, staunch vegan or vegetarians. And they have strong belief that this is the right path. And he says that sometimes they're so, some people are so committed to abstaining from meat or dairy and so forth, that they think that if only everyone would live like that, others will not be harmed. But he said that for us living in samsara, in that state of existence, it's impossible to abstain from harming others in all ways. Even if we do not wish to harm others, inevitably we take actions here and there that come at the expense of others. This is something that we cannot avoid. So it's good to recognize that. I think that there is a humbling experience that comes from recognizing our abilities, but also what we're incapable of. So we want to abstain from harming others, definitely, hands down. Our capacity to do that in samsara is quite limited, but we work, it's for us, work in progress. And so if we know the different parts of an action, like, for example, what is the preliminary part of an action? What type of affliction is involved with that? What type of affliction do I need to avoid? What type of intention do I need to avoid? We'd be able to reduce the efficacy of our negative actions, of our non-virtuous actions. There are some actions that we do not want to do. Inevitably, we have to do them. Even if we live in a world, we live a life that is complicated. We have to make choices. We have to make decisions. Some of them are things that we don't want to do, but we have to do. And so recognizing the way that actions are performed, but also the way that we bring our action to culmination, we can reduce the power of our negative actions, even if we perform them. Like, for example, I spoke before about having to call pest control for my house that is infested by termites. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, killing insects is a negative action. But here I have a choice that I make. Now, I have to weigh what the prohibition is according to the Dharma, but also what's the purpose in performing that action nonetheless, and to take personal responsibility for that action. So I regret it, although I think that it is necessary. And so when I do it, in this way, I reduce the power of a negative action. So we spoke about killing in a previous session. Also, as I said, I've collected points from Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, also from Pabongko Rinpoche's presentation, Liberation at the Palm of Your Hand, and also from a great commentary, a wonderful commentary that was composed by Geshe Sopa that resided in the US for many years. I think it's called Steps on the Path to Enlightenment. So for those of you who are interested in reading a more in-depth, but also more accessible Lamrim presentation, I highly recommend that book. When you sometimes read Lama Tsongkhapa's text, the language is not easy, although Lama Tsongkhapa is praised everywhere. Still, sometimes the language is difficult for us to access. It's difficult to relate to everything that Lama Tsongkhapa says, although it's very informative. Geshe Sopa's book makes it so easier to relate to the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa. And so I've collected those points from those texts. And as I said, we need to keep in mind that it was taught for a particular audience, and therefore it has a certain vibe. Lama Tsongkhapa was teaching a community of monastics. Sometimes community of monastics need to be taught in a very strict way. Sometimes I reckon also in a very menacing way. And so we hear this tone carried in the teachings, and I think that's in some situations, sometimes it can be a little bit off-putting. So keep that in mind. I mean, of course, the knowledge, the information is for us to use and to decide what our approach is with respect to that. And when I said to decide what our approach is with respect to that, we don't want to become dismissive of the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa, but also it's good to contextualize them. Anyway, I'm saying that because one point that I brought up in the previous session was one point that I found in Lama Tsongkhapa's text about killing. So in the Buddhist tradition, it is said that killing a human being, that which forms as a human being, is regarded as a component in the path of action of killing. Killing that which forms as a human being, in other words, killing a fetus. So we had a bit of discussion about that. Another thing that I wanted to add to that, as this is a topic that comes up quite often, is about euthanasia. Either euthanizing a pet, also euthanizing a human being, as in part of the world, in some countries. Now it is made a legal action. And so to begin with, I think that the topic, often here we have, every so often we have someone asking questions about euthanasia, or we have school visits to the center. And some schools do comparative study of religions, and wanting to know what the Buddhist view of euthanasia is. So I would like to start by saying that the Buddha didn't speak of euthanasia as euthanasia. What the Buddha thought of euthanasia, it's hard to know. The Buddha spoke of killing as being a negative action. The means for euthanizing pets or people did not exist at the time of the Buddha. It wasn't, I think, a moral issue. Of course, killing others was a moral issue. Killing others either, in a random street fight, or deliberately premeditated, or going to war, or penalizing people. Of course, those things did exist at the time of the Buddha, but I'm not sure that euthanasia as a topic existed at the time of the Buddha. So we don't have Buddhist teachings particularly discussing those options. Now, there are some people that are vehemently against it, saying no, in no circumstance that should be done. Whereas I work with a couple of people, I've worked with a few people before, but I worked with a couple of them that weren't so hardliner. So that basically we have to make our choices, but our choices have to be informed, but also accept the responsibility of our actions. Understanding what our intention is, what our motivation is. And I think that also I said before that when we say when we ask what was my motivation, what was your motivation, it sounds as if we can pin down only one form of motivation that was present at a time during the performance of an action. But really, when I perform actions, even when I perform a positive action, I have a mixture of motivation. I'm motivated sometimes by the attitude to be of benefit to others, care for others, but also at the same time, I have some degree of self-cherishing, some degree of self-centeredness that doesn't allow me to go completely out of my way to be of benefit to others. So what was my motivation in performing a positive action? A whole set of motivations. And so when we think of, for example, having a pet, growing old, becoming more debilitated, becoming incontinent, suffering from sickness, and so forth. I have a friend that is a vet, a Buddhist vet, and at some point many years ago, she decided that she is not going to euthanize dogs or cats anymore, as we call them, put them down. And she said that some of the reasons that people use for euthanizing their pets were ridiculous. She said that kind of the most ridiculous reason was someone brought in a dog to be euthanized because the person brought in new furniture, and the color scheme did not match the dog. So I wanted the dog to be put down. Yeah, that's frivolous. But then, when a dog, cat, or what have you get sick, sometimes the bills are really high. Now we have to pay, at least in Australia, thousands of dollars are paid to the vet. Also, there is a certain level of inconvenience if you have to nurse a dog or a cat and so forth. I mean, the degree of inconvenience that we go through could vary, But it's interesting that, for example, if it was someone of a family member, a partner, a parent, one of our children, a brother or sister, we might decide to go out of our way to care for them. In a way, we would do it to a pet that we have, even if we kept it for a few years. And so we have to think of, first of all, am I going to do it because it's an inconvenience to me, it inconveniences me, or am I going to do it because I really care for the dying animal, for an animal that is in pain? Euthanizing an animal is a negative action, but am I doing it because it's just an inconvenience to me, or because really I care for it? Am I willing to take on the karmic responsibility for that? So here I'm not condemning anything strongly. I'm just saying that those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we take a certain course of action. Am I taking responsibility for my actions? Am I doing them because mainly I care for myself, or I care more for myself and less for others? So at least one of the teachers, one of the geshes that I've worked with before, said before that he thought that when you see an animal suffering greatly, and your heart is motivated by a pure sense of compassion for them, and you're willing to take upon yourself the responsibility for that action, thinking that it is a negative action, but at least I'm freeing them from suffering, maybe it's a valid course of action. And there are Buddhist tales, Buddhist stories that illustrate that. But really, if you go to ask a geshe or a lama or a rinpoche or whatever, should I do it or should I not? It's often that you kind of want to shift the responsibility from your side to their side. They're the ones making the decision for you. So it's for us to take personal responsibility for our actions. So that's with respect to euthanasia. And I think that with that, we can probably move on from the action of killing to the action of stealing. Maybe not move on from this action, but move on from studying killing to studying the path of action of stealing. But actually, before we do that, I also wanted to have a look at the results of actions. But before we do that, I see that Lorna has a question.
Yes, Venerable, just around euthanasia with humans. In Canada, it's called medically assisted induced death or dying. And the individual chooses that for themselves.
Yeah.
So would that be considered like a suicide in Buddhist terms?
I would say yes. I mean, yes, in general, but also we need to look at it, sometimes case by case. Like, for example, you can have different forms of kind of assisted death, in a sense that you can say that one form of assisted death is choosing to come off certain life-sustaining or life-prolonging medication or treatment, and you have a team of people around you that helps you to go through a more comfortable process of death. So that's one form. Another form is for people that suffer deeply from either physical situation or mental situation, in which they decide to, for example, take an injection that will end their life. And so I think that probably that would be considered as suicide according to the Buddhist tradition. And in general, suicide is regarded as also as a negative action, is severing a life. Now, I think that the approach to that, again, should be a compassionate approach rather than condemning that action. Yes, from a Buddhist perspective, it is a negative action, but someone that gets to that situation, find themselves in a situation where they are suffering greatly physically or mentally, they are already in a very compromised situation. And so a compassionate approach is better than a condemning approach. I think that at least we can think about it in a variety of ways, but what the solution is, yes or no, for me, it's kind of, I find it really difficult to say vehemently, no way whatsoever. And so But still, still I think that of course, it does not mean to say that it is not regarded as a negative action in a certain situation. And so from a Buddhist perspective, if we think about it, not only in relation to this life, but from the perspective of going from one lifetime to the next, we do suffer to a certain degree, something to a great degree as human beings. But we still have a capacity to utilize the mind, to use the mind in a certain way. And so suppose that we take our own life, and in the next life, immediately after that, we are born in a miserable state of existence. So being born in a miserable state of existence, like an animal, for example, means that it is likely that we will keep on taking rebirths for a long time in a miserable state of existence, suffering probably greater than the suffering that we have currently as human beings, having a lesser capacity to be affected by the Dhamma, to encounter teachers, to understand the teachings and so forth. So yeah, we do experience sometimes great suffering as human beings, but in some sense, comparing to the depth of suffering in future lifetimes and the duration of the suffering, still we're better off in this life, considering that also we have great supporting systems around us that do not exist in other states of existence. So no, again, having said that, I do not downplay the suffering that people experience, particularly when I think about it in relation to my parents, for example. And this is a point from a different perspective. So my parents were not into the Dhamma at all. If anything, because I was involved with the Dhamma, they were a little bit against it. And so when my mom passed away, and that was, I think, back in 2008, she passed away after many years of different illnesses and sicknesses. Her situation was painful all the time, at least in the last few years. And also a mental state was always full of anguish, full of pain, and it was always uncomfortable. And also she became a little bit bitter or sad and afraid and so forth towards the end. And so sometimes we say that human beings have this incredible intelligence and you can use it for practicing the Dhamma, but that was not the state of my mom. That was definitely not the state of my dad. Yeah, so as human beings, we can still use our mind to create virtue, but I don't think that in their case, that they were serious practitioners of virtue. I think that if anything, they probably have continued to have a really difficult mind all the way to the end. And so, you might wonder, is it better to pass away quickly rather than creating more negativities with a negative mind? Or is it better to continue to live having suffering, physical and mental suffering, and at least not experience suffering of other states of existence? I don't know. Those questions are so individual so specific to a particular individual that it's difficult to say unanimously yes or no. I think that it's still kind of generally still considered to be a negative action. If you're a person working in a medical profession and you can make your own choices, then, if I were a person like that, I would make a choice of not working in that particular field in order to make sure that at least I, as a Buddhist practitioner, do not get involved in that. Maybe it's a cop-out, but I think that kind of, the world is complicated. We have to make our decisions at the end, and there's often there are no perfect decisions.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned about it from a judging point of view because everybody has their own decision, but I'm just wondering about it from a karmic point of view because just from observing and listening to people's stories and people who have fought for the right to be able to end their own lives, but wanting other people to do it for them, which I find interesting, is the karmic impact of that. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Lorna. We live in a world that is complicated. Karmically, the world is complicated. When I say karmically, it's like we can make decisions, but our decisions inevitably also affect others. So it's hard.
Well, this is it. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so what I did in my preparation for this set of teachings and also other discussions that we had about karma before was to also look at the actions from the point of view of their result. And so often the result is spoken of after the presentation of the actions, but I wanted to present each action also together with its result. And so often we speak about three types of results. There is result that is called fruition or ripening result, and often it refers to the type of birth that we take in the next lifetime. So often it says, as a result of killing, we have a miserable rebirth. Sometimes we say, in the hells, hellish state of existence. So that's a ripening result, the type of rebirth. The second type of result is the environmental result. So for example, it is said that if we live a life in which we harm others, we kill them, we beat them, we bleed them, and so forth, we will be born in an environment that will also be rough and even violent, places that might be affected by wars and so forth. That's called an environmental result. As far as believing or trusting that this indeed is the case, as I said before, with the topic of karma, there is some blind faith that is required. And when I say blind faith, it is not completely blind. It is based on other teachings that we have studied before and made sense to us. If teachings on emptiness make sense, if teachings on the afflictions make sense, if teachings on patience, loving kindness, compassion, and so forth make sense, we can also open our mind to other set of teachings such as karma, and to at least keep the option open that environmental result is possible when we perform certain actions. So particularly when we think of finding ourselves in an environment that is quite harsh, particularly this current climate, when we think of, for example, I remember reading a few weeks ago, months ago, about places in the US that are running dry. Millions of people are affected by the drying of the river systems and so forth. We can consider that to be an environmental result of negative actions done before. What those negative actions are, it's hard to know. I don't know. The Buddha knows, but I don't. Anyway, that's the environmental result. Then the third type of result is called result that is similar to the cause, or causally concordant effect. We perform an action of killing, for example, we experience the similar result, but the similar result can be expressed in two ways. One of them is in terms of our experience. So we harmed a person before, we've killed a person before. In this lifetime, our life is shortened, either by sickness or by being killed, or we get harmed by others. If in the past we have criticized others, in this life, we're criticized by others. If we have lied a lot before, not only in this lifetime we're being lied to, but also the next type of causally concordant effect is in terms of our experience, a similar experience. Sorry, should have said that's part kind of another type of causally concordant effect is in terms of the habits that we develop. So we've killed someone before, or living beings before, many living beings before. We have a greater tendency, habituation to do that again in this life. And when we look at this type of result, the causally concordant effect in terms of the habits that we form, in terms of our behavior, that's the worst one. In that it causes us to create those actions again and again. We spoke before about karma increasing, and I raised that doubt whether karma increasing can also be associated with developing habits that make us create those actions again and again and again, and thereby reinforcing the negative actions, but also the negative effects that we will experience in the future. And so in relation to killing, let's look at that. Let's look at the effects of killing. Where is the file? There it is. So the result of killing. So I see that Michael, thank you very much, Michael, has distributed the file amongst us. So the result of killing, first of all, the causally concordant. So a short lifetime and many illnesses. The environmental effect of killing is things in the external environment, such as food, drink, medicine, and fruit. Let's see, environment. Such as food, drink, medicine, and fruits will have little strength, be ineffective, have little potency and power, or being difficult to digest and will induce illness. Most living beings will die without living out their expected lifetime as a result of killing. And so that's the first path of action, non-virtuous path of action of killing. What we can play with in terms of reducing the power of killing is the affliction involved, the motivation that is involved. Definitely, if we have to perform such an action, we can make sure that the performance is done without malice, without inflicting a long period of suffering or torture upon others. And also when we complete the action, we can do that with a sense of remorse, but also we can also take rectifying means. For example, if we have to kill, as I said before, if we have to terminate pests in a home, termites and so forth, we can contribute to animal liberations in another place. So that's a completion. Let's look at the next one in line, which is stealing. And so to steal something, we need to steal something that is fully possessed by another. And this is an interesting point because often when you look at, or at least most of the texts that I've looked at, stealing was regarded mainly in stealing from other human beings. Sometimes questions come up, like, for example, what if I take birds from a bird's nest? Is it regarded as stealing? The bird thinks that the eggs are its eggs, so taking the eggs from a nest, is it stealing? All the teachers I've worked with said, no, this is not stealing. To steal, you need to steal money from another human being. Not only you need to steal from another human being, also it needs to, whatever you steal, whatever you take, needs to belong to them. Now, stealing in Tibetan is called taking what was not given to you. And so to discuss what constitutes stealing, often it says that it needs to be of a certain value. Like, for example, I don't know how it is in the US, but growing up in Israel, when you go to the supermarket and you have boxes with, boxes or containers with nuts and raisins and so forth, and you can pour into your bag and wait for however much whatever the quantity you want to buy. People sometimes just go by and pick up one almond or one raisin and eat it. Now, we're not branded as thieves if we take one almond or one raisin. It's not something that we consider to be of a recognized monetary value. But if we take a handful or a bag of raisins and not pay for that, we're probably going to be branded a thief. So whatever we take that was not given to us, first of all, needs to be of a certain value. What the value is, in the Vinaya tradition, there is a certain discussion, but in general, we say that the value should be such that if we take it, we will be branded as thieves. And so, first of all, the basis is something that is fully possessed by another. Now let's look at the next one, which is the attitude, the perception, the affliction, and motivation. And so the perception needs to be as above, which means that in order for a fully fledged path of non-virtuous action to occur, the perception needs to be precise or unmistaken. So, for example, perceiving something possessed by another to be possessed by another. That is an unmistaken perception. Now, if we perceive something possessed by another to not be possessed by another, it is a mistaken perception. Another way, kind of this way of phrasing it is a little bit clunky. I think that what Lama Tsongkhapa meant by saying that is that suppose that we take something that was not given to us without having any idea that this is someone else's property. We had no idea that it belongs to someone else. This is a mistaken perception. Could be a negative action being performed, but the weight of the negative action would be smaller because our perception to begin with was mistaken. So that's the perception bit of stealing. Now, with respect to the affliction and then the motivation is any of the three poisons. The conclusion motivation is of desire. So we take something that was not given to us because of desire. Of course, you can take something that was not given to you as a means of extortion or bullying someone, wanting to harm them, to damage them, to make the resources become depleted, and so forth. But to conclude the affliction part of the action of taking what was not given to you, it needs to be taken with a certain sense of desire. And the motivation is the desire to take away from the other person without it having been given to us. Now, looking at the performance, it says that it is the same whether you take something by force or steal it sneakily. Being deceitful with respect to a debt or a trust and using other fraudulent methods also constitutes stealing. It is the same whether done for one's own or for someone else's sake or to harm someone and the like. It is the same if done by oneself or by sending others to do it. So it is similar in some sense to a point that we, I think, discussed in relation to killing. And so we know that, for example, killing is a negative action. We do not want to do it, and so we send someone else to do it on our behalf, to do our biddings. It is the same whether we do it or we enlist others in doing that. Actually, it is likely that we could create a greater negativity if we enlist others to do our biddings. I mean, of course, if you call a pest control service, no, you cannot do it yourself, so you ask someone else to do it on your behalf. But if you think, I don't want to do it, so I'll just call someone else to do it because I'm Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist monk, so I can't do it, so I'll ask someone else to do it on my behalf. It's the same as if you've done it. So similar with killing. You don't want to steal, similar with stealing. You don't want to steal, but you ask someone else to do it on your behalf. It's the same. You've done the action of stealing. Now, there are a few interesting points that Lama Tsongkhapa mentions here, which I think that makes it relevant to the way that we live. Like, for example, and these are points that I just bring up for us to think of, right? So I'm not here telling you what you need to do or what you ought not to do, but I think that those are, as we take responsibility for our own karma, for our own decisions, we also need to make sure that we do it in a way that is informed as possible. And so, for example, many years ago, I used to download quite a lot of pirated movies and TV series and sometimes books and so forth. At some point, I thought to myself, well, again, taking something that was not given to me and definitely prohibited by law. So I decided to give it up. Now, if I want to watch something, I just pay for it. If I want to watch something on HBO, Netflix or whatever, just buy it. And it's not a big deal. That's at least the choice that I made. So that's with piracy. Another point is, for example, taxes. That's a sensitive issue. That's a very gray area, I think. Just a second. You can come in if you want and have a look. And so for example, paying taxes. If we avoid paying taxes or paying something that we should be paying, that we are obliged to according to the law, does it constitute also stealing, keeping funds that we shouldn't keep? Does not mean to say that we cannot be to some degree creative about managing our tax system, but avoiding taxes, for example, or any other payment because we think that this is my money and I don't want to share my money. Is it stealing? Is it part of stealing? I guess this is a personal, reflection that we can have with ourselves. I mean, for me, for example, I think that part of the taxes that we pay indeed are used for buying weapons, for things that probably that I myself do not agree with, but still I live in a certain legal system. For me, if I do not pay taxes, it's considered to be an illegal action. And therefore, I need to obey the law of the land. And therefore, I'll do it happily. Then, another things such as, for example, avoiding paying in the bus, if you can do it, paying a fare. Or if you sneak into the cinema or whatever, avoiding paying it for a ticket and so forth. Is it stealing? Well, I myself prefer to pay if I'm requested to pay. Like that, I feel that I'm on the safe side, feel comfortable that I haven't undermined my own ethical discipline. I'm trying my best to guard pure ethical discipline as much as I can. And so those are the things that I think that we start thinking of, which could be more of in the gray area when we consider the negative action, the non-virtuous action of stealing. And so here Lama Tsongkhapa says, with respect to that, let's look again at stealing. Where is it? Killing, stealing. It is the same whether you take something by force or steal it sneakily. Being deceitful with respect to a debt or trust, or I say also with respect to taxes and so forth, and using other fraudulent methods also constitutes stealing. It is the same whether done for one's own or someone else's sake. So there was, for example, one, having grown up in Israel, we had one corrupt politician who is now again in power that stole money in fraudulent way and spent it on people that supported him from his party. In claiming that he's not doing it for himself, he did it for the sake of someone else to improve the situation. And so here Lama Tsongkhapa says, it is the same whether done for one's own or for someone else's sake or to harm someone and the like. It is the same if done by oneself or by sending others to do it. Now the completion is one who was sent to do the job, which means that it seems that the completion is you send someone to do the job. I wonder whether you've sent someone to do the job, whether if the deed is not done yet, where you send someone to do it, the deed is not done, whether you already accrue the negative action of stealing. Probably there is some great negativity in that, but at least when I think of the previous action of killing, to complete the action of killing, this is also an interesting point, a random point. The person being killed needs to die before you die. And so, for example, you send someone else to assassinate someone that you don't like, right? So you sent an assassin, but you die before the assassin did your bidding. It is said that if you die before the other person, you do not accrue a full path of action. Also, if you have no idea that the action was done, you still accrue a complete path of action. How does it work? I don't know. So I guess that also with stealing, it's similar. You've sent someone else to do your bidding. When it was done, even if you're not aware of it, you've accrued a full path of action, since that's probably what it means. And so looking at the weight in relation to the basis. And so something that makes the action of stealing very heavy, or we can also think of lighter, when it is involved taking a great deal, taking good things, stealing after deceiving those who trust you, stealing from the lowly, which means someone in compromised or a difficult situation, stealing from the impoverished, stealing from renunciates, which means monastics, or you can say other Buddhist practitioners. If what is stolen is of high value, or the property of the Sangha or stupa, those things play a role in influencing the weight in relation to the object, the basis. So there are a few points that we can think of in relation to that. And so, for example, stealing after deceiving those who trust you could be your parents, could be your lamas and so forth, could be your fellow practitioners. If they trust you and you deceive them and you steal from them, it's a very negative action. Stealing from someone that is poor, lowly, and so forth. Stealing from monastics, taking things that were dedicated to the Sangha, or also it says that stealing something that was dedicated to the three jewels is regarded as a very heavy negative action. And so the result of stealing are as such. First of all, we have the causally concordant effect. The result of stealing would be a lack of resources, and the resources we do have would be shared with others. Also, looking at the environmental result of stealing, having few fruits or results to whatever we do, the fruits will not be perfect, will change, or will be partially spoiled. There will be severe drought or torrential downpours. The fruits will dry up or disappear. This is found in Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation. I think that also we can think about it either metaphorically, or we can think about it in relation to actual fruits or crops, whatever you grow. Again, when we experience a difficult situation, when we feel that we live in an environment that is really difficult, we can take it up into a practice of mind training, in thinking that, at least when I think about it in relation to karma, I can think about it as this current situation that I experience now is a result of past accumulated negative actions. I don't know when I've done them, I have no idea. But certainly, if I experience drought, if my livelihood depends upon agriculture, and whatever I do does not bear fruit, it is an environmental result. What I should do henceforth is to work not only on working better in whatever I do, but also to safeguard my ethical discipline, to abstain from killing, from stealing, and so forth, so that in the future, I will not have to experience such results again. Any questions about stealing before we move on to the next one? Cool. Let's look at sexual misconduct. This is, I think, a minefield for us. In that, I think that when I read through the very religious explanation of Lama Tsongkhapa about sexual misconduct, again, as I said before, I remind myself that he taught to a community of monastics, but mostly to male monastics. And therefore, his explanation is, I wouldn't say tainted, but it is tainted by that circumstance. I wouldn't call it tainted, but this is, I think, why he say things in a particular way. But also, as one of the teachers that I worked with many years ago said in one teaching, said, someone asked him about why, this action was negative, this sexual act was negative, and the others were not negative. And the Geshe answered, darling, all sex is bad. In samsara, all sex is bad. I thought it's kind of it was quite an epic way of stating that. And he said that basically, whatever we do motivated by desire is keeping us in samsara. And so if whatever we do is motivated by desire, is still keeping us in samsara and is still continuing the cycle of samsaric suffering, it's hard to distinguish between good sex and bad sex. But still, of course, there are guidelines. And so often when I with the teachers that I work with, translating, when we get to the whole topic of sexual misconduct, and particularly how it applies to us, living in the 21st century, and also particularly for most of us, or most of you actually, living as lay practitioners, the basic rule is a sexual practice or behavior that is not damaging oneself, is not damaging others. Which means that basically, if we have a relationship, maintaining loyalty and honesty and truthfulness in our relationship. Not wanting to have relationships with others if we're already in a recognized relationship, or if we have no relationship at the present, but we know that someone else does have a relationship and we still want to have a relationship with them, that's also a sexual misconduct. It harms us, but it also definitely harms others. It damages the happiness of others. So that's, I think, the kind of the greater emphasis of the teachers that I've worked with. Now, the things that are included in the chart are things that I've taken up from Lama Tsongkhapa's text. So some of them are, you might regard them as being kind of pretty full on, or a little bit old fashioned, whatever you might want to call them. I think that, again, he was teaching to a group of monastics, male monastics, from the 16th century. Sorry, not 16th, 13th, 14th century, where it seems that according to kind of this attitude, any excessive sexual behavior that goes more than just for procreation is a bit over the top, I think. Anyway, having given all those disclaimers, let's look at what Lama Tsongkhapa says. All right, sexual misconduct. So it begins with those who you should not have intercourse with. Those are the basis, right? So the basis for the object for sexual misconduct is your parents and so forth, women under the care of their mothers, which means that basically underaged. Then it says the same sex and hermaphrodites, and the ordained. Now, with same sex, most of the teachers that I work with, if not all of them, are pretty relaxed about same-sex relationship. I haven't heard about, and I've worked with, I would say dozens of teachers here in Australia or in other parts of the world. I found no one that really condemned same-sex relationship. So I'm just going to put it here because this is what Lama Tsongkhapa says, but also I think that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is quite open-minded with respect to that. Many of the people that are involved, not only with the center here, but also administration level, people that have created our institutions, some of them are in a same-sex relationship, and I haven't had even once them being condemned for their relationship. So, we don't, I think, have to make, I think, now a big deal about Lama Tsongkhapa says, because I think that the attitude has changed over the years. Anyway, that's my approach to that. Then the second type of inappropriate object for for sexual misconduct is Lama Tsongkhapa speaks of inappropriate body parts, which means that is kind of a thing that is speaking about limiting our sexual activity to the sex organs. Again, I think that is speaking about anything that is other than procreation, anything that fuels that desire and so on and so forth is keeping us in samsara. Then in inappropriate places, close to the gurus, places with stupas in front of altars and so forth. Then inappropriate times during pregnancy, when you abide in one-day vows, etc. These are the basis for sexual misconduct. Now, as for the attitude, let's look at the perception. According to the compendium, it needs to be non-mistaken. According to the Vinaya, it could be it needs to be a celibate, which means an ordained person. I think that the most important, or more important, in terms of our attitude, is the three poisons. So any of the three poisons could be involved with sexual misconduct. Definitely, we perform sexual misconduct with desire, but it can also be done motivated by anger or ignorance. Such as, for example, we hear now in the world about rapes, for example, that were done with anger as a means of punishment, right? So that's a sexual misconduct motivated by anger or hatred. But still, the concluding motivation is of desire. And the motivation is the desire for intercourse in a manner that constitutes improper conduct. The Lama Tsongkhapa says that the performance is endeavoring for the sake of that, which means having a go at that. And the completion is the two coming together by two, which means that basically doing the deed. Now, what turns the action, sexual misconduct, to be weighty is sleeping with those who you shouldn't have intercourse with, your mother or relatives, wives of friends, nuns, and so forth. Again, Lama Tsongkhapa was speaking to a community of monks, so we can also reverse that. If you're a woman, then sleeping with monks, for example, would be an example of that. If you kind of have a same-sex preference, of course, that could also apply according to the situation. Then inappropriate body parts, then Lama Tsongkhapa mentions oral sex, inappropriate time, with one observing a one-day vow during pregnancy or at the end of term, or with one who is ill, inappropriate place in the vicinity of a stupa or within a compound of the Sangha. And so let's look at the results of sexual misconduct. The cause of the concurrent effect is an unruly spouse and your helpers would be disorderly or untrustworthy. An environmental effect is living where there is excrement and urine, mud, filth, unclean things, many bad smells, misery, and discomfort. And so that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says with respect to sexual misconduct. I think that in general, in previous teachings that I've been to over the years, I think that this topic of sexual misconduct becomes very sensitive. We're less sensitive about killing, stealing, lying, and so forth. But when we start dealing with what constitutes sexual misconduct, whole hell breaks loose. And so I think that, again, we need to sometimes think of, I think, the bigger picture. The bigger picture is any excessive sexual activities, according to Buddhism, is keeping us in samsara. From the perspective of the Lamaran tradition, and those teachings are taken from the Lamaran tradition, we want to turn our attitudes away from samsara and towards liberation, and therefore we want to decrease our involvement with things that keep us in samsara. Teachers that I work with say that basically keep it safe, don't harm yourself, and definitely don't harm others. And that's the beginning point for a more healthy sexual life. Lorna?
Yeah, I always find it interesting that rape and sexual assault is not explicitly listed there, because that's happened from time immemorial. And I just find it interesting that it's never recognized as such.
Sorry, Lorna, did you say sexual assault?
Yeah, and rape and sexual assault.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it is kind of true that here it doesn't say, it doesn't use those words kind of explicitly, but still in terms of the, in terms of the afflictions, it says that any one of the afflictions can be a motivating factor for sexual misconduct, including hatred, anger, and so forth, which are involved with those cases, sexual assault.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me that they'll pull out homosexuality.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess it's because maybe it's women who predominantly get raped, that it wasn't sort of recognized as something to, I don't know. I just find it very interesting that it's not listed there when it's something that has just been prevalent throughout time, you know, and it really prevalent. And a lot of people have suffered from it throughout time, and yet it's not listed there. It's kind of inferred to. So I just kind of find that interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And also I think that one thing to add to that, again, in thinking of the context of those teachings, now they were given by the Buddha in India 2,600 years ago, a very patriarchal society. Still very is patriarchal society. Also, when I say it, it does not mean to say that our societies are not patriarchal. No, they still are, maybe to a lesser degree, but still are. When you hear about contemporary sexual violence in India, but not only in India, in other parts of the world, still, most of the people that suffer from that, as you say, I guess that are women. I don't know the statistics, but I assume that are women.
Well, most rape crisis centers are visited by women, not by men. Women go to them, kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. And so when you look at, for example, the monastic vows, vows, for example, for full ordination, there is a certain, so when you become a fully ordained monk, there are 253 things that you need to abstain from. When you become a fully ordained nun, 363 things that you need to abstain from. And so someone say, well, some people think that women are more dominated, I think, in the Buddhist world because they have more things that you need to abstain from comparing to monks. More things constitute infraction of the vows for nuns than for monks. But then when you look more deeply at the vows or the restrictions for nuns, some of them have to do with, I think, this is my idea. I haven't studied that in great detail, so I'm not giving you like the fully academic informed presentation. But I think that within some of the restrictions that you find in some monastic rules, not in all of them, but in some, is that nuns that travel somewhere, fully ordained nuns, have to travel together in pairs and so forth. And so otherwise it will constitute a breach of the monastic rule. It doesn't mean to say that they lose the vow, but it constitutes a certain breach. I think that probably part of the reason for stating it in this way was that when women travel alone in India, there was a greater chance of them being subject to sexual violence.
Yes.
Therefore, you can say that as a means of protection, there were, it was stated that if they travel somewhere, they have to travel together to protect themselves. And so sexual violence is implied within that. I mean, the existence of sexual violence is implied within this mode of conduct that was stipulated.
Right.
Yeah.
My beef is just that it's implied instead of explicitly.
Yeah.
But I know the Dalai Lama does include rape when he talks about sexual.
Yeah. So I fully agree with that. What I said is not kind of justifying why it's not. I'm just saying that I'm agreeing with you. So rather than stating things explicitly, something that I found there implicitly, but you have to kind of dig in order to dig in, but also to keep broader cultural and historical context in order to see how it manifested in the teachings of the Buddha.
Sure. No, and I understand that for sure. It's just always curious. That's all.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that probably also, for us, those things bother us because we expect them to be there. But I think that we expect those restrictions and references to be there. But I think that our mindset is quite a modern mindset. Even in our society, I reckon that 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, if a woman was raped or assaulted and so forth, it was the attitude in society was that was her problem, that was her fault because she did this or did that and so forth. So also for us, this expectation that it would be spoken of explicitly in the open, I think that it's more of a modern approach, which is, I think that it should be embraced, of course, but it's I think newer phenomenon. And so let's look at the next group of actions, non-virtuous actions or non-virtuous path of actions of speech. The first one is lying. And so the basis for lying, the direct basis, is that which seen, that which heard, that distinguished, that cognized, not seen, not heard, not distinguished, not cognized, which means that we can lie about what we saw, what we heard, what we thought of, what we understood, or what we did not see, what we did not hear, and so forth. Now, the indirect basis needs to be another person. So we don't lie to ourselves, we lie to another person. We misrepresent reality to another person. So it needs to be a person other than yourself who can understand the meaning of what has been said. So one cannot lie to oneself, or one cannot lie to someone who doesn't understand the meaning, such as a dog. But also, on top of that, let's say that, if I speak, I assume that you don't speak Hebrew. If I talk to you in Hebrew and I tell you a lie, I misrepresent reality. That's my attitude. If you don't understand what I'm saying, you don't have the basis for lying. You need to have someone that understands the meaning of what you said. They don't have to believe what you said, but they have to understand. So, for example, if I tell you, I have a 10 karma abiding. I know that I haven't. I have a 10 shamatha. I know that I haven't attended, but I want to misrepresent reality, and you understand the meaning. You don't have to believe what I say. It's enough that you understand the meaning for a lie to occur. Even if you don't believe anything that I say, it's enough that you understand what I'm saying for it to become a lie. So that's the basis. Now let's look at the perception. So the perception is changing something one has seen into something one has not seen and the like, which means changing or misrepresenting what you've seen, heard, or not seen, not heard, and so forth. The affliction involved with that is any of the three poisons. So we can lie through anger, through attachment, through ignorance. And also the concluding motivation is any of them. And the motivation is the desire to express it and change the perception of another person. Now we perform the actions through speaking, accepting by not saying anything, or showing through a sign, which is a body movement. And so to lie to someone, it's not that we necessarily have to speak. So for example, if you guys ask me, so have you realized emptiness? I haven't. But if you say, have you realized emptiness? And I don't want to answer that question directly. I don't want to say no, so that you'll still think that maybe I have, or maybe but you believe that I have. Even by not speaking, it is lying. Or if you ask me a question, have you attained shamatha? I don't have to say it in words, but I can nod my head. And through that you understand what I mean. It could be through a physical gesture that I lie. And so it's good that Lama Tsongkhapa states it like that, because sometimes we try to find loopholes that will supposedly safeguard our ethical discipline. So we do not lie directly, but we leave the door open to lying with a physical posture, or choosing to say something or not to say something. The guideline is that if we misrepresent reality in any way, it's lying. And to culminate the action of lying, Lama Tsongkhapa says, it needs to be understood by another person, by the other person. They don't have to believe, they just have to understand. And so what then influences the weight of the negative actions is through desiring to delude and deceive, telling lies with many purposes, lying to those who help you, like your parents, your teachers, and so forth, lying to good persons and to friends, telling a lie that gives rise to one or more of the three weighty actions: killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct. So you lie to another person, and thereby they perform the action of killing or stealing or sexual misconduct. So that makes a lie become very big. So telling a lie in order to create a rift in the Sangha is the heaviest. So of all the different lies, it says that those which create rifts in the Sangha community, that's something that we need to definitely avoid. And so looking at the results of lying, the causally concordant effect is much slender. We will be criticized, slanted, and we will be deceived by others. The environmental effect would be any work that we do in fields or in boats, if you guys are doing any work in boats, will not flourish. There will be no harmony amongst your workers, and for the most part, they will be deceitful. You'll be fearful and have many causes to be afraid. And so at this point in time, what I wanted to do is to speak of the refuge vow. Just kind of as a side point, I want to speak of the refuge vow. And so for those of you who have taken the refuge vow, sometimes it is called the lay vow or the vow of approaching virtue. Different names to the same thing. You might decide to become Buddhist and then you make it formal through taking the refuge vow. Within the refuge vow, you can decide to abstain from one or more of the 5 actions. So killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicants. Leaving intoxicants aside, the first 4 are things which are regarded negative by nature. Killing is negative by nature, regardless of whether you have a vow. Stealing, sexual misconduct, and a lie, regardless of the vow, any vow that you have, it is negative by nature. Now, when you take the vow, you take it with a specific intention. While any action of killing is negative, the one that is included within the refuge vow is murder, in intentional killing of another human being. And so suppose that you guys, I guess it also applies for me as a monk, but for you guys mainly. For example, you've taken the refuge vow. You have a dying animal. You choose to euthanize it. Could be, as I said, according to our discussion, in general, we would regard it as a negative action. It's not an action that will cause you to lose the vow, to break the vow. To break the vow, it needs to be a killing on an intended killing of another human being. Any killing is, you can say, negative, but to break the vow, it needs to be the killing of another human being, an intentional killing of another human being. So that with respect to killing. Now, with respect to stealing, any stealing that will cause you to be branded as a thief, which means that it needs to be of a certain value, it will cause you to break the vow. With lying, let's look at lying. With lying, not any lie will cause you to break the vow. The type of lying that is involved with the refuge vow is lying about developing superhuman abilities, particularly in a spiritual context. And so sometimes in our life, we inevitably tell white lies. Sometimes it happens to me also. Inevitably, I'm so used to it from this life, from previous life, that sometimes I just kind of randomly, without even intending to, it kind of just leaves my lips, my mouth. It's a negative action, but still, to lie in a way that will break my monastic vow, or for you guys to break your refuge vow, you need to lie about spiritual attainments. Like, for example, you need to claim that you have attained bodhicitta, or that you need to lie about attaining shamatha or enlightenment, or that you have realized emptiness and so forth. You need to do it knowingly, in the sense that you know that you haven't attained those states. And while knowing that you haven't attained them, you claim that you have, then you've broken your vow. And so for that reason, it is considered to be frowned upon if teachers or people of kind of some spiritual, people that rose to certain spiritual acclaim, it is not regarded as common for them to speak about their attainment. So it's, for example, if his honest asks, are you enlightened? Are you a Buddha? He often says, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a simple monk. Also, when we ask our geshes, have you realized bodhicitta? Have you realized this? Or have you realized that? Most of them would say no. And I think that again, stepping back from those individuals and looking at the system in general, it's a great system of protecting us. If it was common, allowed, permissible for people to speak about their spiritual attainment, we would be susceptible to being deceived by charlatans. There's so many people at least particularly at this present time, where they lie deliberately about the spiritual attainment or claim to have those magical forces, powers, and so forth. Maybe some of them do believe that they have them, but some people deceive others. We are protected by that deception because it is considered to be negative to speak about one's own spiritual attainment. So to break our vows, we need to lie about our spiritual attainments and claim those superhuman abilities. Any lie is a negative thing. To break a vow, it needs to be a big lie. So that with respect to lying. Then you have sexual misconduct. I think that sexual misconduct is, probably any form of sexual misconduct would constitute a breaking of the vow, particularly for us as ordained people, for me as an ordained person. But also I think that in general, when we think of infidelity as being a source of so many problems in society, if you have the vow and you engage in that form of sexual misconduct, then also it breaks the vow. Any questions before we move on to harsh speech? Cool. All right, let's look at harsh speech. Actually, divisive speech before harsh speech. Okay, so divisive speech. The basis for speaking divisively is sentient beings who are in harmony or those who are inharmonious with each other, which means that we are using a speech in a way that is divisive, trying to set people apart, or if they're already apart, we think that I don't want them to reconcile. I don't want them to be good with each other. I want to keep them separate, and therefore I will use my speech in a way that is divisive to keep them apart. That's the basis. Now, the perception would be, again, for an action to be weighty, it needs to have a correct perception, unmistaken perception. So, for example, perceiving those in harmony as harmonious, perceiving those in harmony as not harmonious is unmistaken. Let's look at the affliction. Any of the three poisons is involved with divisive speech, but the conclusion motivation is any one of the three poisons. Now, the motivation for divisive speech is the desire for those in disagreement to not be reconciled, or those who are compatible to be separated. Right, as I said, to either separate between those who are harmonious or to keep those who are not in harmony apart from each other. And we do that, the performances, through expressing either pleasant or unpleasant topics with either true or untrue words, and saying them for either one's own sake or for someone else's sake. So this is actually kind of a really important point. So with divisive speech, you don't have to necessarily speak something that is false. Sometimes we set people apart, we divide them through lying to them, but we sometimes think that I want to keep them apart, so I will just tell them what the other person has said about them. I mean, I'm speaking the truth, so there's no problem with speaking the truth. I'm just telling them what the other person said about them. If our motivation is to keep them apart so that they do not reconcile, that is a divisive speech, even if what we say is true. So sometimes, as I said, sometimes when you think of the combination of different situations, you might be speaking the truth to another person, and as such, you think that there's no problem with me. I'm speaking the truth, I'm not lying. I'm just telling them how things are. But still, if in our motivation, we do that not because we want to benefit others, but because we want to keep people apart, it's divisive speech. And so the performance is the divisive words that were expressed being understood. So again, it does not mean to say that we actually divide people or that we keep them apart. It's enough for them to understand what we say in order for that action to be culminated. And so the culmination says, due to speech that splits apart those who have been friends for a long time, teachers, parents, parents, and children, and the Sangha. They are divided. And divisive speech that gives, this part discusses the weight of the action. So the action becomes weighty due to speech that splits apart those who have been friends for a long time, splitting at teachers, parents, splitting between parents and children. Actually, this part, parents and children, and splitting between, creating a rift in the Sangha. And also divisive speech that gives rise to the 3 physical actions of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. That's definitely a very weighty divisive speech. Now the effects, let's look at the environment. You will be in a place that is bumpy, craggy, uneven, and difficult to traverse. You'll be fearful and have many causes to be afraid. These are the effects of divisive speech. So again, when we think about it in terms of our transition in life, if we find ourselves in those situations, not just kind of for one day, but if it's an ongoing difficult situation for us, we can think about it as an environmental result of divisive speech and think that henceforth, I should not only be harmonious with others, but I will try to be a conciliating person between others. That would be not only purifying previous actions of divisive speech, but also creating positive pathways for the future and being more harmonious with others, bringing people together. Now, I think that our time is up for today. I have another session starting in 45 minutes. And so if you have any other burning questions at the end, we can do that. And otherwise, we'll just dedicate the merit that we have accrued together. All right. And so thank you very much for joining us today. What we will do, just by the way, to give you just a heads up, what we will do in the next, I think that this is the 3rd discussion that we have together. We have 3 more before your practice day. So I think that probably in our next session, we will finish going over the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions. Then we will speak about the 10 parts of virtuous actions. We will speak about them probably briefly or in a less elaborate way. We'll also then speak of the purification of negative actions done before, speak about it a lot. And then we'll also speak about a point, I think, that Michael brought up maybe in the first session, how we then use our motivation, our intention and so forth to influence the way that we behave daily so that we incorporate the whole presentation of karma into our daily practice. So those are the things that we will also discuss in the future. And so thank you very much for coming along today. Let's dedicate the virtue that we have created together in thinking about this material, asking questions, thinking about it, continue to think about it in the future. And we'll dedicate it for, first of all, to be able to create solid foundation for our own ethical discipline, so that will be a foundation for our practice, spiritual practice in this life and future lives, leading us to the state of liberation and also leading us to the state of enlightenment. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow. And may that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And dedicating for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then to the flourishing of all of his activities. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful John Rezik Tenzin Gyatso, please remain till samsara ends. Sever of the snow-land teachings and transmigrated beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And finally, for the sake of Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche, but also implied within that, you can think of all the other spiritual teachers that you rely upon, but also I think that it's nice to add the people that are involved with top ennobling, either in the level of administration, people that support the activities, sponsors, benefactors, and so forth. All of them may have a long life and be successful in whatever they endeavor. You uphold the Sibyll's moral way who serves in the manifold bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading my generous victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venerable.
Enjoy the rest of the week and have a good night, everyone.